Okay, good morning, everyone. This is the session. Let me see here. This is the session 25, land use impact on food ecosystem and renewable resources. I'm Cicero Lima. I'm the chair of this session, and also Uris Baldos from Purdue is our host. So we have 20 minutes for your presentation, guys. And when you have 2 minutes left, so Uris will let you know. And after this time, we can open for Q&A, and we have around, let me check here, around some 5-10 minutes, Uris, correct? For Q&A?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and we move to the next presentation. So for the first presentation, the title is Trade Policy and Land Use Impact from, Alessandro will present today. Alessandro is from European Commission, and yeah, I think that's it. So the floor is yours, Alessandro. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to you, Cicero. Okay, so I hope you can see my screen. Yes. Okay, perfect. Thanks. So this is a really ongoing work. Ongoing because mainly it's this is an update of the current GTAP land use model. So it's still something that we are working on, and it's a joint work with Erwin from the Center for Global Trade Analysis, Purdue University. I guess that all of you know him. And by myself, Alessandro Antimiani, which, as already said by Cicero, I work for the European Commission, and specifically in the DG Trade Directorate. So the aim of this work is to try to, to go a little bit further in this topic of land use, which is quite often we match quite often with deforestation and with the trade policy, specifically the free trade agreements. So mainly the point is that there is a debate where more trade can cause more land use, and in case of specific countries, as it is in the Mercosur countries, these land use can be a sort of diversion of forest land. In this job, we focus on the possible agreement between the Mercosur and the EU. Again, I guess that all of you are aware that this is an ongoing negotiation. A first agreement has been reached, but there is still a debate on this. So my presentation will be mainly on 3 points. The first one, I will just give you some highlights of what the EU, the European trade policy, currently contain in terms of preventing environmental bias of trade policy. Then a brief review, highlight of what is the discussion on the Amazonian issue, specifically the possible impact on deforestation. And then what we did, which is a preliminary CG analysis with the GTAP land use, the GTAP A and Z. I mean, we can call in both with both names. As usual, a disclaimer that clearly all the views expressed herein are just personally and not necessarily the views of the European Commission. So I don't know how much all of you are aware that in the European trade policy, now it's more and more we use these trade sustainable development chapters that mainly they can focus on different objectives. Could be, for example, the labor rights. But one of the topics, which is clearly an emerging one, is a binding commitments on environment. So the idea that we should use trade policy to increase, to improve, to raise the level of commitments toward a greener trade policy. And this is now is really a part of the current negotiation, and so clearly they are, when we say environmental issue, clearly can be climate, biodiversity, the use of fertilizer. So there are a lot of issues within the World Environmental Agreement. And specifically, the most recent has been exactly in the case of Mercosur, because there was a big discussion, a debate, both at level of civil societies, European Parliament, but also international ONGs, pro or against this agreement. And one of the most important, the most controversial point has been the possible impact on Amazonian forest, so the deforestation, the use of Amazonian land, Amazonian forest for agricultural production. And then since the first preliminary, I would say, agreement, there has been an update, exactly because this large debate, and then the TSD chapter in the Mercosur agreement has been significantly improved towards a more important, I say, objective to preserve the forest land. So this is just what is in the current debate in the European trade policy. So there is something that is going towards more and more a greener trade policy debate and discussion, and then arrangement. And then we have the EU-Mercosur FTA agreement. As I said, has been not signed yet. There is an agreement in principle, but there has been a large debate, and the debate is still ongoing. And clearly, as usually when there is a debate, there are also analyses that are coming out. Here I will show just 4 analyses. One of these is this serology study. I try to summarize, but clearly these are quite sometimes big report. Here the main point is that they first highlight that the domestic policy is important. So the enforcement of the forest code that has been, if I'm right, with the Lula president, but then has been modified with the last government. So this is the first point, that they are pointing out that there is not just trade policy, but there is also a domestic policy. The second point is that this large debate is because there is an FTA discussion, because there is an FTA stalled, because there is an FTA negotiation. But the EU, even if is the one that is discussing an FTA with the Mercosur, is not the larger trade partner of Mercosur, specifically also of Brazil, which is China and US. So again, this study is a sort of claiming that now it's, I mean, it's more, it has been this all lights on the negotiation of the possible agreement, but then we are losing the global picture. And finally, there is the point that we will see that is going all the other studies, which probably is the most important, and also is quite important for our results, is that part of the discussion is on livestock, ruminant meat, sugar, something like that. But then there is, and also soya production and soya beans. And then this report, as well as the other, is clearly is stressing the idea that soya beans is probably, in terms of crop production, is the most important, the most impacting. And in this case, the EU play a role. And so there is space for the trade policy to be improved under this perspective. The second report I want to report to you, the report I want to report to you, okay, is by Amazon study. In this case, they use CG, so a similar approach that we did. Their results are quite strong in terms of the possible impact of this agreement. They also are against the TSD chapter, so the TSDC state per chapter. Clearly, we don't agree with this because this TSD chapter is something that has been part of the new process for a greener European trade policy. We can say are not perfect, but clearly we have also always to keep in mind, I want to stress now, I don't know if I will remember to stress later, trade policy is not an environmental policy. There is the Paris Agreement, there is other contexts, other places where we have to play for environmental objective, environmental target. This is a trade policy. But even in the trade policy, there is the trade chapter, the trade sustainable chapter. And then they claim that the impact is very huge, but for us in this case, you will have the chance to read this report. They play a little bit with the parameters of the model, and for us, the results are a little bit biased. So we didn't really look at all the results as a reference. Then we have the French government study. Again, here we have been quite say that we don't agree fully with this study because there are some bias that we will see later. First, they mainly focus on livestock. So the impact, they claim that is mainly because of livestock and then because of ruminant meat. And we already have seen before from the serology study that the point is more soya. And why? Because we have to distinguish between deforestation and the completely change of the land use. Deforestation is a sort of degradation, is the first step, where sometimes you cannot produce soya directly on forest land. You have to wait some years. In this between, there is this livestock production, which is not the main target of deforestation. So this is the first point. Second, they plug in this French government, which is also some here and there in the news, in some ONGs, information they always put together Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and they sum up. Again, is not always the case because it's very few the share of Amazonian forest that can be involved in this process in Argentina, because the production of livestock in Argentina is really more in the south, and Paraguay, Uruguay is completely different because the share is very small. But at the end, you can see they sum everything. So there is a sort of uniform sum up of the land, which is not the case. And finally, the PNAS analysis, the Proceeding on National Academy of Science analysis, again, here is a sort of, and they again stress the idea that the more efficient land management and major technology innovation in agriculture can have the potential to prevent a crop shortage. So this is mainly focusing on the productivity. And this is also another point that I want to stress, because here in this French government study, for example, the productivity is fixed, is given. But if we see the curve of productivity is increasing, and it is still below the level of productivity that we observe in other developed countries. So there is space to play with productivity. But what I want to say that when we look later on, we will see that a small increase in the production that we can observe by model or by just projecting pooling, because more trade. So any increase in production in Brazil can be covered not with extra land, can be just covered by the natural productivity growth. So we have to always to be very careful when we look at the possible impact that productivity is in the analysis. Otherwise, the risk is always that we say we need more land for increased production. We sometimes could be a mix at least of the two. Yes, this is just the show that how domestic policies can really influence the deforestation rate. So we can see that since it was implemented at the beginning of the 2000, the rate of the deforestation really goes down. Then here is just about, again, to stress the idea that soybean is a problem. Then there is a problem, in this case, also linked to the role of the EU for the biodiesel. So we have we have not to be distracted by other, but clearly there is space to work on this because soybeans is the one that is making pressure. And then, as you say, when we move to the soybean production, we are in the full deforestation. Until the first 2-3 years, we are more in the degradation, and there is space to go back, there is space to restore forest. But when we move after 4-5 years, and then we plant soya production, then the issue is big. And so in soybean, there is also big world demand increasing. Again, there is also a role for China, but there is also a role for the EU. And then the other issue that, compared to what I was saying before, while for livestock the productivity is growing, for soybean is not growing. So here there is a space to work with specific chapter in trade policy, to work to carefully check and monitoring what is going on the soya production market and the soya market trade. So I'm saying that there is a problem, but there is not the 100% problem with everything. So that could help us to focus on the issue, because again, we can see that China is also the big player. So whatever we do in terms of European Union, clearly we have also another player. As I said at the beginning, then with Erwin, we did the first update of the model. We ran the model. As I say, this is a standard version of the model that you can find in the GTAP hub. We did very simple scenario where we plug the possible outcome of the agreement. And then we run mainly just two simulations. One is just the agreement as it is. And then the other one is the agreement as it is, but reducing the substitution elasticity between forest land and agricultural land, I mean cropland, and to meme the idea that this should be like a different domestic policy approach. We just took, you remember this, so we just implement the different rate to rebate the trade, the substitution elasticity. So we just took from the past what could be a better, more representative elasticity in a context where there is a strong domestic policy against deforestation, where there is a weak. So the two scenarios are as it is or stronger as could be. I don't go into details. The idea is very simple. Usually in the standard GTAP, we have only one type of land, which is used for primary production, while in this we have this agricultural economic zone, and then we have the competition between forestry with the other with the cropland. And then clearly, in this case, the parameters are quite important, and this is something that we are working on. We are working on to improve this kind of model. And very briefly, so as I said, in this analysis, that is again is important to stress. We didn't put any assumption productivity, which clearly we could. It could be we are thinking how to introduce, because we observe that there is an increase in productivity, so that could be part of the next step of the analysis. But in very short, the main point is that if we run the business as usually, so we just implement the agreement without touching any domestic policy, we observe that the change in the deforestation is negligible. I mean, probably it's around 0. We have 0.1. So why if we this is the impact of forest land, so it could be even positive, and I will tell you after now why. If we introduce some stronger domestic policies towards a forest protection law, the impact could be positive. Clearly, we are talking about a negligible, a very small number. So in very short, there is no significant impact. This is the point. And why? And that is, there are several reasons, but the most important is that, again, when we have to keep in mind that when we do an FTAs, then we are eliminating tariff. So we are leaving the field to more natural competitive advantages. But also,
Alessandro, you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, this is the last slide, and we'll go to the conclusion. So thanks. So what is going on is that mainly Brazil, in this case, is exporting, is increasing the export of manufacturing. So clearly there is inputs moving from primary agricultural sector to manufacturing. There is a premium price on other agricultural production. So soya beans is not increasing. There is no reason to increase the export of soya beans, but there is reason to increase in other, like fruit and vegetable. We observe an increase because there is a premium price to go to the European market to get more as gap respect to ruminant meat and soya. So the point is that we have to keep in mind that there is also a sectoral production diversion that is linked to the trade diversion. So in conclusion, the productivity, we already said, there is space also for I say for ruminant meat is not the main source of the problem, because as we said, there is space for productivity, there is space for also for trade, for sectoral production diversion. But as I said, soya bean is an issue. It's not because just the Mercosur EU FTA, because we said that there is not a big increase, but soya clearly is part of the point, and then could be improved in terms of negotiation agreement in the EU Mercosur. But we have also to keep in mind that the other two big players, China and the US, they don't have any agreement in place, which means no rules, which means that since the competitive advantage of Brazil are huge compared to other countries, clearly there is reason to expand trade toward this market. Thanks for listening.
Oh, thank you, Alessandro. Very nice presentation. So I have just one question. So to open the Q&A. So could you comment about the tariff when you updated the tariff in GTAP, and also the quota for because, for example, if I'm not right, I'm not 100% sure, but for example, the cattle exportations from Brazil, the beef exports Brazil to Europe, so we have some quota in the agreement. So how you can how did you treat this in the model? And also it's interesting because when we run these scenarios of trade agreements, when Brazil is doing an agreement with a big player like European Union, China, or US. So we can notice this huge increase in the returns of land and the natural resources in Brazil. So we are expecting more this use of this resource. So could you comment this? And also, when we run the simulations, for example, with the rest of South America or some countries in Central America, we notice the opposite. So yeah, so
yeah. So for the first point, it's okay. I didn't touch the issue of TRQs because this is on one end is yeah. So yes, there are TRQs. So the export from Brazil is limited to a given volume, and that is also part of our, of the European narrative to say that we are focusing on the Mercosur FTAs agreement where there is a limit on export of ruminant meat by Brazil, while there is no China and the US or in other countries, or at least is not ruled. We did, one of the ongoing improvement is that now we have in this new V7 version of GTAP, we have a new piece of code by Dominique van Broek where we can include explicitly the TRQs, and we will do this. For now, we just computed the change in the cut of tariffs that provide us the increase in value of the volume that is being given in the agreement. So it's a sort of, we do the computation out of the model and then we just target the model to this. There could be a mistake, but not so much because that is clearly is a quota. So in any case, there could be that probably we overestimated it because the price can move differently because the price we assume outside of the model and then we derive the volume and then we say that we plug. So if there is an initial tariff by 50, we can say that by reducing 5 percentage points, we have an increase in value which is equivalent in the increase in volume by the current observed price. So that's it. And then the last point, again, to put in the slide some of the debate, I didn't put the sectoral results. But the sectoral results are that, as I say, that Brazil is increasing in other sectors. That clearly is a point in this kind of modeling. Why? Because we know that we have fixed the full employment. So clearly, when we say that there is an increase in other sector, probably there is just that there is inputs coming from one sector to the other one because there is no unemployment. Otherwise, we can keep increasing in the sector that is pulled by trade without decreasing the other sector, which is so in this case, we are aware that probably there is an underestimation of the possible impact. But then I want to show the sign. What I want to say is that the agreement is in any case pulling other sector than ruminant meat, soya bean. Why? Because clearly they are pulling manufacturing sector, but also in the agriculture, they are pulling more fruit and vegetable where they can have a higher premium price. In the ruminant meat, the limit is the quota. Clearly, if we clean the quota, 100% of the export will be okay. That's not the case, but because there is also a high premium price because it's also a higher value added. But clearly, compared to soya bean, which is more industrialized crop, there could be a premium price on other sectors. So there is a bias because of the full employment, the full use of resources, but there is also important to show that the agreement can diversify the Brazil production toward, and I want to say that Brazil is also quite strong in services. There are some services that they are on top, they are competitive advantages, which clearly can pull resources from other sectors and increase the export on this.
Oh, okay, thank you. So Angelo has a question. Angelo, please.
Yes, I have a question and a comment. Alessandro, was very interesting the results that you got. So I understood that the impact on deforestation from the Mercosur and European Union agreement would be quite small, and with right policies, environmental policy in Brazil, it will be null at all. So my first question is that, so given your study, it seems that all the complaints from the European Union about the agreement because of environmental concerns is quite hidden protectionism. There is a hidden protectionism reason behind that, not exactly an environmental problem behind this. Did I get it right? And my comment is that you pose a lot of responsibility on the soybean as one main driver of deforestation. You know, when we look at the literature, it's most of the first deforestation happens, and then we have some cattle, then soybean, and this correlation is quite hard to find that soybean is the main driver. It always has some share of the burden, but not all. But fundamentally, we have a problem that most of the econometric models cannot catch. That cannot capture. That is the problem of a free resource, almost free resource, free land, cheap land, and then there is a informal land market where it's very easy to grab a piece of land and guarantee that land is yours, just putting some cattle there, and in the future you sell to someone else if some cattle rancher or some soybean producer shows up. So there is a kind of challenge to try to capture the reasons behind deforestation. And if you think about the way that we developed the world, this is the way that we did the development. We just removed natural vegetation and put some economic activity there. As population grow and income grows and development goes on. So we need to find another kind of development strategy for that region if you want to keep the forest alive, because what's happening there is just what has happened everywhere in the world, right? And as those resources are abundant for the local people or people moving to that region, it tends to be cheaper and easy to transform that in a more productive resource. So this is my first question. It's okay. Doesn't make sense that that Europe is claiming environmental concerns under the agreement, because we don't see that problem of deforestation with the agreement. And second comment, how we deal with this Amazon problem at the in a global perspective of development, if we just allow things be as they are in terms of environmental concerns and normal way that society has developed. We have developed just removing natural vegetation. How we will prevent that to happen in the Amazon under the same development approach? Do you have an answer for that?
Okay, thanks, Angelo. I mean, mainly, I guess that it's not one question, it was a set of questions, which it's not easy to reply to everything, especially also to avoid to say something that my hierarchies can complain. Let's go. I mean, here and there. I mean, it's. I mean, I fully agree with the. I mean, just go from the most technical point. I fully agree that this use of pure economic to deal with this issue is not the best, or I would say that probably we could say even we shouldn't do. There is a specific, I mean, directorate in the European Commission, the GRC, and then I can also use there is a colleague from GRC here, Emanuele, that they clearly use a more, let's say, different tool with clearly satellite data, with more serious substitution between land. That is, everything is true, but clearly on the other hand, we have also to comply with the sort of we have the rule of transparency to provide as much as possible information on what is going on. And then in DigiTrade, we focus more on the economic analysis, but then clearly we have also other analysis, both for internal, external use. If you search, you can find other reports. So I don't want to simplify. I fully agree with you. For me, the point here is to stress that the big is to stress something that is this productivity, which is not always. I mean, this French government, for example, study they didn't take into account there is nothing about productivity, and this is not just because the modeling or whatever. The other is, which also this is a part of your question. Okay, the EU is negotiating an agreement with Brazil, but again, EU is not the only big player in the world trade. So if we want to, we can choose if we want to be positive or negative. That is clearly. I mean, I don't have the best reply to you. I can say that in a positive view, clearly the way to do agreement by the Europe is it's taking into account environmental issues, taking into account labor rights. So it could be a sort of to pull all the other countries to increase the rights, to increase environmental protection. If we want to be negative, clearly we can also say that the EU is moving pollution away, because when you clearly you divert some of the agricultural production. Okay, but then I can reply, we are also probably can also trade technology. No, we can also improve the technology use. We can also improve the productivity. So we can be positive or negative. It's not really black and white, but that is more. Yeah.
Alessandro, I'm afraid that we have to go to the next presenter.
Yeah, but there was also
overtime. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I mean, it's I know that the debate is very.
Yeah, it's a wonderful discussion. Yeah, but
I don't know if Manuele wants to say something.
We can do it bilateral. Don't worry, Alessandro. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. It was a question for me. It was not a reply. It was
not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
Okay, Ferike, could you upload your screen?
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you, Angelo. So the next presentation is the title is Implications of EU Import Stop and Food, a dark cloud with a silver line. So Ferike Thom, she will present to us today. She's a PhD student in Berlin. Okay, the floor is yours, Ferike. Thank you.
And see my presentation all right? If not, just interrupt me. So today I'd like to present on my current work, implications of an EU import stop on food. And import stop on food, that's very...
Ferike, your microphone is a little bit unstable. Maybe you should, put it a little bit closer. Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yeah, I could hear you now. Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah, it's better? Okay, then I will proceed. Okay, so first of all, it's a very, very big, very, very general scenario. So what's the motivation behind it? Why do we even want to look into that? Well, there have been quite a few examples of trade disruptions in the last couple of months and years even. So there's the pandemic, first of all. There was the US-Chinese trade war. We all probably remember very well the clogged Suez Canal. And of course now, and that's a major thing, of course, in food and agriculture, we have the war in Ukraine, the sanctions, which disrupts trade a lot. So of course now the question for policymakers would be, could self-sufficiency, especially in such an important sector as food, be the better alternative to dependency on imports, dependency on politically unreliable trading partners? And if so, for which product would it be better? And could self-sufficiency be reached at low costs, or will it be very costly? And this is something where we identified a double research gap. So first of all, there is only quite little literature on trade reduction compared to the huge literature that we find on trade expansion. And there's only quite little literature on such an extreme scenario. And for us, we of course want to know, when we're talking about such extreme scenarios, can our standard models even be used to depict them? And when I'm talking about our models, I'm talking about equilibrium models, because of course, even through all this idea of self-sufficiency, this is supposed to battle the risks associated with trade. But of course, we should know what such a scenario would mean in an equilibrium also. So how did we get to our question? We are we modeled a scenario that included drastic import reductions for most food and feed products. So I'm talking about cereal, vegetables, fruit, oilseed cakes, meat, animal products, and drastic import reductions means really minus 90% for the EU from all other countries outside of the EU. As a model, we used the Common Agricultural Policy Regionalized Impact Model, CAPRI. This is a partial equilibrium model, so it looks at the agricultural sector, and it consists of two parts. So we have the European supply module that really goes into the detail of where Europe produces agricultural goods, and it has a global market module linking the production and the demand of all global countries and trading blocs together. And we implemented that using a prohibitive import tariff, but as it is a PE model, this did not distort anything. It was just our method, so that's probably only interesting for the modelers among you. So what were our results? We found that there are different reactions to that import stop for all the commodity groups. So we have the first commodity group that was relatively unaffected by that import stop. So these were cereals, vegetables and fruit, dairy, and this was because the EU is actually a net importer of these products. So when imports stop or like a severe import reduction did not affect these commodities very much. Then there was the second group, which was directly affected, and this is oilseed, and mainly soybean, but also rapeseed and sunflower seed, because they are, of course, important substitutes for soybean. For these products, EU is a net importer, and for soybean, it is a large net importer. So, that's why it was directly affected. And then we have the third group of the indirectly affected products that were affected by the import stop for oilseeds, and these were meat and upstream products. So oils, oilseed cake, and for the EU is a net exporter, actually, but still they were affected by the import stop. So let's have a closer look on the oilseed sector, because there we saw the biggest changes. So this is the EU market balance in the status quo for oilseeds. And you see the imports here, the orange one is much larger than the domestic production that we have in the EU, and the soybean are really by far the biggest part of the imports, and also in the European market, they dominate. And what we also see is that the biggest part of all the oilseeds go into animal feeding. And here again, soybean is the biggest part. When we now look at our scenario with the import stop, basically, to rapeseed, soybean, sunflower, and all the rest, we see that, well, of course, imports go down a lot. That's what our scenario was about. We have an increase in production, but as you see, the overall quantities are still much smaller than in the status quo. So the increase in production could not make up for the missing missing soybeans and missing imports, and also especially feed decreases a lot. So we have much less animal feed in the EU in our scenario. So now, of course, if we have such an import ban, also the supply in the EU reacts. And here you see the supply changes as absolute differences in the EU for general, for cereals, for oilseeds, and for cattle activities. So what we see for cereals here, as I said, cereals is actually the one that is rather unaffected. So we do have decreases of cereal production in some areas. We have increases in some others. So that's the green one. So this is rather about a reallocation of cereal production in the EU, but it's not actually an increase or a decrease. That's different for oilseeds. For oilseeds, you see it's more or less greenish with some exceptions. So we have an overall increase in oilseed production in the EU. We have a decrease of cattle activity in the EU. That's not a surprise, considering the last figure. We have much less oilseed, much less animal fodder around. So of course the cattle activities decrease. And but in general, what we see when we have a look at the overall utilized agricultural area, this increases a lot in the EU, of course, because the EU would have to substitute for the missing imports. And you see that, like especially Turkey or UK, that are not part of the EU, but were trading partners of the EU, there the utilized area goes down because, well, they cannot import to the EU anymore. So this is already the first hint that such an import stop of the EU, of course, affects also other countries that were trading with the EU or that are trading with the EU in the status quo. So, and that's also why I then had a look at the trade balance between the EU and other countries. So I had a look at country groups, and what you see is that the net exports decrease, respectively, the net exports become net imports from the point of view of the trading partners of the EU. And this makes sense. I mean, the imports into the EU, so exports from other countries, go down a lot. The exports from the EU also decrease, but much, much less. So this means that the net flow of money associated to agricultural trade with the EU, worsens, decreases for all other countries. And this really is the dark cloud that I have in my title, because this, of course, has negative income implications for all other countries trading with the EU. When we now have a look at this is exactly the same graph, but here I only look at the animal products. And here we actually see exactly the opposite. So the EU is a net exporter of animal products, but in the status quo, but in our scenario, of course, the exports of animal products from the EU decreases a lot. So these countries, like all countries, you see that this bar always gets smaller here. All other countries have to have less imports of animal products from the EU. And this is something that I consider maybe the silver lining of this whole scenario, because of course there's a lot of added value associated with the production of meat products, especially when you compare to raw materials like soybean. There's much more income associated with this. And this, of course, then could be a chance, this import stop scenario could be a chance, especially for low and middle income countries, to get some of that animal production into their domestic agricultural systems and maybe realize some of the income associated to that and kind of take it from the EU. So if we also have a look on the price effects that we have from that scenario, this is also quite interesting, because of course the prices in the EU, so you see that here, mostly green, they go up. And it makes sense if the EU prohibits imports, the supply is smaller in the EU and the prices go up in general. We see that for most parts in the other countries, when we're not looking at the EU, the prices go down or don't change that much. But what is then also interesting is that the meat prices here, they go up all over the world, and also for other animal products in the least developed countries, the prices increase, the dairy products increase rather in high income countries, but also worldwide. So this is really the change that we have here, that the animal products become more expensive. And this again, I mean, when you now remember the last slide, this means a deterioration of the terms of trade for the trading partners of the EU, because they were the importers of meat. Meat becomes more expensive. So this is, rather, not an improvement. Okay, but when we're talking about improvement, let's have a look at the welfare. Of course, as economists, we're always interested in the overall welfare changes, and we see that we have a big decrease in global, in European welfare, of course, because prices become so much more expensive. So here, this is the overall decreases in the welfare of the EU, and this is mainly due to changes in vegetables. Here, the EU is a net importer, and prices go up, and we have the meat, and here is the EU, the net exporter, but the exports decrease. And this EU effect also dominates the worldwide effect. But as you see, I mean, here there are also welfare changes for all the other countries. Let's have a closer look at them. And here you can also see that it is oilseeds that are responsible for the welfare losses in the high income countries. So this is the gray bar here, and also in the middle income countries. This makes sense because they cannot export them to the EU anymore. So this is a loss of income. But however, these countries now process more of them themselves to oils and oilseed cakes. We see that only the middle income countries can actually profit from this new EU policy of an import stop. This is associated to the trade income that changed for them. And what we see here, when we have a look at the least developed countries compared to all the other welfare changes, this is the smallest change. But of course, if your overall welfare was smaller before, and we're comparing absolute terms here, this of course does have quite a big effect. And this welfare loss is mainly due to, it comes from vegetables, because vegetables are usually imported in the least developed countries, and they became more expensive. So last figure I want to show you, these are the global greenhouse gas emissions, and they increase from in the scenario that we modeled. And as you can see, we have here this reddish bar. You can see that everywhere, this is the meat. And the global all the changes that we see in the global greenhouse gas emissions are driven by the reallocation of meat production. So meat production in the EU goes down because the animal feed would not be available in our scenario. So that means that the meat exports decreased, and the other countries, the consumption didn't change that much. They had to compensate by producing meat on their own. So this is why the emissions associated with the meat production also increased, and we see an overall increase in global greenhouse gas emissions. And this is because this reallocation of meat from the EU to other countries meant reallocation to less efficient places of meat production. So meat production in the EU, of course, we all know meat production is bad for the climate always, but in the EU it is relatively efficient because it's so highly technologized. And with that shift, meat production is shifted to countries where it is less efficient. So this means overall increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And even if we have a look at the overall transport that would go down because of the reduced trade worldwide, still this is not enough to counteract this the sum of all these changes, so that we end up with an increase in global greenhouse gas emissions from such an import stop scenario. So just to wrap it up, in an isolationist EU policy, an import reduction of soybean has by far the biggest implications for both the EU and its trading partners. So all the things that I presented to you, they were mainly driven by soybean and its effect on meat and animal production. There are some limitations to our modeling or to our simulation. We possibly underestimate these effects even, because we have rather unflexible human demand function in our model, and because the Armington assumption also fixes and possibly underestimates the actual effect and like a complete import stop scenario would have. Also, the greenhouse gas coefficients we use to calculate these emissions, they are static, and the results of course depend on the estimate. So maybe if the meat production really shifted for a long time to other countries, there the meat production would become more efficient, and then the greenhouse gas emissions of course would be different. So this is something that we have to acknowledge. And maybe also some like a small outlook of what we want to do next. We want to rerun the simulation with a more flexible human demand function that is really following the demand function for animal feeding, so that people don't consume following their habits and what they always have consumed, but that they are really flexible, really reacting to the price, optimizing, eating less meat in this case, because that's really more expensive. So this might give us a more adequate results for that really extreme scenario. Then we would want to do a sensitivity analysis regarding the elasticities of demand and supply, and we would like to double check our results regarding the greenhouse gas emissions, maybe use some other coefficients for that. So currently it's the IPCC coefficients, but this is something that we would like to have further look at. So then I say thank you for your attention. If you're interested in that topic, we already published a related paper that looked at the consequences of the European judgment on genome editing in agriculture. So this is a very similar scenario. It looks deeply at the soybeans. I'm sorry, I'm at the airport. I'm just happy that it was quiet for the rest of the talk. Okay, so thank you. I'm looking very forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Ferike. Very nice presentation. So I think that Angelo has a question, so I have some comments, but I can add these comments later. Please, Angelo.
Yes, I have a quick question, Ferike. Nice presentation. I'm more concerned about the motivation of the work, and to understand if you were testing a kind of short-run shock, a kind of disturbance at the short run, some problem in the world trade, or it's a more medium-long run scenario where Europe decides to close the economy to food trade. And my question is motivated by, as a trade economist, as agriculture economist, it goes against all that we believe, right? So trying to find allocative efficiency, specialization, and trying to find the cheapest way to get the goods that we need. It's quite dangerous to go that pathway if we believe trade economics and microeconomic, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree on the latter part. I also started working on this topic when I thought, okay, this is an extreme scenario, might be interesting, but I did not realize that it could be, like really relevant. But we see it right now, and at least in Germany, there is a lot of discussion about building more resilient agri-food systems that are not so prone to any shocks like now that we have in the Ukraine or from the Ukraine war. So I mean, I'm very, very far from doing a political recommendation of having the EU stop any imports on food. Rather, our motivation behind that was, okay, let's have a look, how costly would it be? And would it be, I don't know, if we do it for soybean, will it come at the same costs as if we do it for wheat or for cereals? So this is rather the idea. And here we're really looking for for a long-term, or this would be a long-term scenario. So we assume that we have permanent stop of imports and have all this adjustment. Or we look at a point after the markets have adjusted to this kind of policy, to also like not have the short-term disturbances that we see now, that they're just trade flows that are cancelled altogether. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Julio, please.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I have two questions. So the first is, well, it's not a question, it's a concern. So about your scenarios, actually. So, I mean, I imagine that a scenario where you ban all imports also implies that you cannot export anymore, because probably countries are going to be taking also measures based on this kind of measure by the EU in this case. So probably other countries will also stop imports from the EU. So this is kind of an implication of this. But I don't think that this scenario is realistic. I mean, the trade agreements, WTO, different things would make this very unrealistic. And in that respect, I'm wondering if you couldn't consider a more realistic scenario, for instance, where you consider only a import ban from certain countries, where, for instance, unfriendly countries or non-democratic countries or something like this. And the second question is, I'm just wondering, I mean, can the EU really produce all types of agricultural products? I mean, I can imagine that certain products are not producible here because of the weather or different things. And if not, I guess that the absence of those products might make production in other sectors impossible, in downstream sectors. And it's in that case, I can imagine that even it could be that the whole system collapses. So, but this is something probably you take into account in your work, right?
Yeah, thank you very much for your two points. So first of all, yes, I mean, it's not supposed to be a super realistic scenario. We just saw that there are a lot of trade disruptions, and we saw that there is not nobody has, or at least we did not find that paper where someone really modeled a holistic import stop for everything at once. So this is really something that we wanted to try out, also to find how the stop of imports, how they interact between the one commodity and the other, whether it makes such a big difference that you not only ban soybeans or you only ban meat, but also that you ban these two simultaneously. So yes, we had simulations where we only banned certain crops or certain crop groups, and we also had simulations where we only banned the imports from certain countries. For the latter, when we only had the certain countries imports banned, we saw that there's basically just trade diversion. The produce would just kind of travel through another country and then come to the EU. It got a bit more expensive because of the additional transport costs, but this really did not have a big impact. So we did that. And then on this is really a good point that we did not model yet with the exports banned. I agree with you. In reality, this would be probably the realistic reaction of other countries. So this I wrote that down. This will really be a worthwhile additional scenario that I think I will try to run and combine import ban and export ban. Yeah, definitely. And can the EU really produce all the products? For that, I have to say that we do have like product aggregates. Yeah, so the EU will not be able to produce bananas. But in my model, I don't have bananas. I have like they are in a group called other fruit. Yeah, so there will be some substitution within that group, but yeah, you're right in that regard. Yeah, whether it really disrupts downstream product or like value chains, in our case, not, because really the only thing that disrupted so much is the ban on soybean and oilseed products, and there the EU can substitute with rapeseed and sunflower seed. So even though the soybean production does not increase that much, the EU could not produce that, but it could produce a substitute. Okay. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to Professor Hillberry, please.
Yeah, just I guess I was thinking that since the motivation of the paper is about shocks, and the idea is that this autarky is some kind of insurance, that it might be better to think about what are the responses to shocks under autarky, right? So I mean that I think removing the EU is going to make the shocks worse for everybody else, because the EU trade with the EU is not an insurance, right? There's also the possibility of shocks within the EU to say weather might be rising with climate change. And so, you know, I think if you modeled shocks within the closed economy, you could get at this issue of what is the better way of insurance? Is it more open trade or less open trade? And that would kind of get more to the motivation of what you're discussing. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is really a good point. Also something that we try to stress in the political debate, that like having autarky, it makes you more prone to weather extremes. I mean, it's not necessary that you always have a political disruption of trade, but of course you could have like epidemic in animals there, and then this is also local in the EU. And if the EU does not have any other animal product imports, then of course it would hit more. Yeah, so this is really something that we try to discuss. Alongside the risk reduction, really the shocks and the equilibrium situation. And this is also what we try to say in the political debate. Okay, if you want to build a more resilient food system in regards to trade disruptions, don't think of autarky. Think at least of diversifying the origins of your produce. Maybe take more trading partners into account, even if it makes the import price higher. So yeah, this is really a good point.
I wonder if you couldn't model a shock. You know, let's suppose that there was a high heat in Europe, or you know, or what does the disruption of Ukraine mean for everybody else if Europe is not there? You know, this sort of thing, right? So
yeah, I think we could model that. Like, we can model the shock coming from the Ukraine, and we could combine it with a scenario where the EU does not import or export. Even, I mean, the exporting part is even more important. Yeah, this is something.
I think we need to move on to the next presenter.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions. I will also answer the one question in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I think that we have one technical question from Anton. I think that's about the Sankey diagram. So if you could answer on chat, Ferike. Let's move on. Thank you guys. Let's go to the third presentation. The title is True Wars Investment in the Sustainable Tuna Fisheries in Tanzania, a CG Model Approach. The presentation, the presenter is Asiya Maskaeva. She's a professor of Dodoma. Okay, the floor is yours, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? It's okay? Okay, I would like to switch off the video because I worry about the internet connection. We are so far from each other. So that let me start and let me introduce. Okay, well, I would like to introduce your research results from our project. And this project has been done by the multidisciplinary research team, Tanzanian research team, and also we work in a close collaboration with the Tanzanian government, specifically Deep Sea Fishing Authority and the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries. About the project a little bit later, let's try to talk to, let me introduce your outline so that the first I'm going to talk about the project content, just only a few words. Then background, I focus on the economic importance of the tuna fishery for Tanzanian economy. Then I will talk about the tuna catch, fishing vessel concentration area along the Tanzanian marine waters, and also a few words about economic potential and fisheries management in the Southwest Indian Ocean region. Then talk about the model and data and our simulations and also conclusion, policy implication finally. So that just a few words about the project. It was it is because it is on the process. We are still on the we are still working on this, and so that the project consists of 3 parts. The first part, this is the biological part. There we estimated the tuna biological parameters of tuna and tuna-like species in Tanzanian territorial waters and the exclusive economic zone. The second part, we focus on the investment purposes, and there we estimated the cost and benefits of purchasing new built fishing vessels like Persena and Longliner. And finally, we estimated using the economic model the economic wide and distributional impact of the government policies to expand the tuna production capacity in the Tanzanian marine waters and on the specific macroeconomic indicators and the whole economy. So why this topic is important and why the marine fisheries is important for Tanzanian government? And currently Tanzanian government focus much of attention how to establish and improve the marine sector of Tanzanian economy. And biologically, let me say that the Tanzania has the richest tuna belt of the Southwest Indian Ocean, and according to the World Bank estimation, about 1.6% or Tanzania has their tuna production in full Southwest Indian Ocean. But however, the exploitation of the exclusive economic zone is highly dependent on foreign fleets. And just let's try to some points, some economic points that the access license fees from the foreign fishing vessels estimated approximately more than 640,000 USD dollar annually. But the total annual potential catch of tuna in the EEZ by the distant water fishing national fleets estimated approximately as 8,000 metric tons, which is landed value about 16 million USD dollars. This is the first point. The second point, we can say that the tuna and tuna-like species among the highest demanded fish globally, that creating the favorable environmental for tuna export from Tanzania, so that this provides the opportunity for Tanzania to invest in tuna-like species fishery sector, so to increase its share in the world tuna export market. According to the contribution of the tuna by the Indian Ocean, we can see that the 20% of tuna production comes from the Indian Ocean, and the major traded tuna, this is the yellowfin, big eye, skipjack, and other species. Tanzania, unfortunately, Tanzania has the small export of tuna, but there is a top countries, and we can see that most the importers of Tanzanian tuna, this is European countries and India. Based on the biological data, we estimated the tuna vessel concentration along the Tanzanian EEZ. And when we can see at the figure number 1, the red color, it shows us the vessel concentration. So that we can say that the soft part of Tanzanian EEZ is richer part of the yellowfin and big eye tuna. The big eye tuna also mostly distributed through the whole EEZ. Also, based on some biological estimation, we found that the trend of yellowfin and big eye tuna in the Tanzanian EEZ waters poses the same trend. Reported the findings of other studies, specifically by the IOTC reports. And we found that the big eye tuna stock is not subject to overfishing, but the yellowfin is overfished status with a 92% exploitation rate, and it is continued to be subject to overfishing in the Tanzanian marine waters and in the whole the Indian Ocean. But from the previous slide, we have seen that the yellowfin is a most traded, major traded species in the world market, so that it is highly consumed by in the world market. Also, we have estimated the economic potential of the tuna among the SVO region, and we found that about 500 industrial fishing vessels operating in the SVO region, about 50 purseaners and 450 long liners. And we can see that the 27 vessels belong to the European Union member states. According to the, based on the long line vessels, we can say that the most of the long line vessels are flagged to Taiwan, Seychelles, and China. Skipjack and yellowfin are the main species caught by the European Union purseine vessels and making around 90%. If we can Seychelles and Maldives are the top tuna fishing nations within the SVO region. But Tanzania landed only about 9.3 metric tons with high contribution from their artisanal catch. So that in this study, we sought the opportunity of investing in different fishing methods, such as purseiner and long liner, because this is the most popular vessels. We considered 12 fishing vessels that could be suitable for acquisition of commercial industrial fishing in the Tanzanian EEZ. And our selection of these vessels is based on the technical specification, expert opinion, and I can say that it was a quite difficult exercise to communicate with the shipyards, with owner of long line fishing vessels and purseine vessels, and also to find the technical characteristic of the newly produced vessel. Okay, and then finally, based on our results, based on the results on the biological parameters, on the investment opportunities and opportunities cost and benefits, we decided to use the CG model to estimate the impact on the whole economy, on the fishery sector, tuna fishery sector. We have used the PEP dynamic model. And of course, some modification have been done in order to make the Tanzanian economy as a real picture, so that we introduce the wage curve for the minimum wage and unemployment. We disaggregated the investment expenditure and introduced the investment expenditure in the model. And also we added the total factor productivity in the value added equation. We try to link the CGE model simulation results, specifically output, with the biological stock parameter of the tuna. But I would like to say that the tuna, this is a highly migratory species, and to estimate stock at one point, this is quite difficult, so that to know exactly the number of fish in the Tanzanian EEZ or in the Tanzanian marine waters, this is difficult, because today depends on the migration period. Today, tuna is in the Tanzanian EEZ, and after 1 month, it is in another place. But okay, we try, and we have used CPU as the preliminary parameter for the to estimate the stock. For the CGE model, we have used the SUM 2050 SUM, which has been produced by IFPRI. The SUM has been formatted in the PEP CGE model format. Also, we have modified the SUM. We aggregated some sectors and the products. And also we put much attention on the fishery sector, which was disaggregated into the freshwater and other marine water fisheries. They are in the marine water fisheries sector, the tuna and tuna-like species has the contribution just only 2.1%. But if we can look at the value added of the fishery sector totally, it is equals 2.5, with artisanal tuna contribution just only 0.2%, so that we did not get the good results from our simulation currently, but we are working on it. So that let me say a few words about simulation. We have run several simulation scenarios, but here I would like to introduce just only two. So that the first one, this is investing in the ocean economy. Specifically, we based on the support from the International Fund for Agricultural and Development, which has launched the program to support the agricultural and fisheries development in Tanzania. During 2020 to 2026, IFAD will financially support the marine fisheries sector in Tanzania, with much focus on the tuna sector. So that from this case, we increase the foreign direct investment in tuna fisheries sector by 10%. Also, we increase the FDI in machinery sector by 2.5%. This is specifically focused on the purchasing the investment, purchasing the industrial fishing. And also we have estimated the public investment in capital that is used by fishery sector, and it was increased by 7%. And the second scenario, this is relevant for the current time, and especially it is relevant to the marine sector. This is a floating world oil prices. According to our research, which is indicate that the fuel cost is approximately, it is more than 40% of ex-vessel tuna prices, and the cost of fuel is shown to affect the profitability, which also may impact employment, food supply, food security in the whole economy. And so that we decided to increase by 20% the world oil price, and then consider the transmission channels on the marine tuna fishery sector and the whole economy. Based on our scenarios, we have received the results, and I would like to say that, and that this is we expected to get these results that from the first simulation scenario mostly the results are positive, but we can see that the rates are too small because the contribution of the tuna sector also too small to the domestic production and to the value added or to the GDP. So that the results of the first simulation reveal that the investment in the Tanzanian EEZ involving the purchasing of fishing vessels positively affect macroeconomic variables such as GDP, unemployment rate, consumer price index, and private investment. Also, the tuna. This is tuna. This is a high price species in the domestic market, and so that the main consumers. This is rich urban households, and also this is a tourism sector. This is a representative of the tourism specifically. We link the tuna accommodation and restaurant. We have seen that the results show that it is a positive impact on the consumption the tuna by these sectors, and so that also we found that the high stock of productive capital from abroad, specifically from the FDI inflow, leads to expansion of the output in all sectors, with the highest increase in tuna and fishing vessel sector, machinery sector. We can assume that the decrease in consumer price index more than nominal income. So increasing household purchasing power, especially for tuna consumption among the richest urban households. And the second simulation scenario shows us negative effect, and this higher import prices translated into higher purchasing price for both domestic producers and final consumers. Also, we found that the decline in economic output in sectors leads to GDP, and significantly is observed in the manufacturing sector because this sector is highly dependent on oil and oil as an intermediate commodity, and of course that there is significant decline in the total investment expenditure and gross fixed capital formation. So that this is a negative scenario. And finally, that these results, but generally based on the results from the whole project and specifically from this part, we can conclude that that the further investment in the Tanzanian, the study showed the positive results for the further investment in the Tanzanian EEZ, and specifically in the tuna and tuna-like subsector. Based on our results, we would like to focus on the policy debate, and we would like to suggest to the government, and we suggested already to the government, that the government should engage the private sector, first of all, to see the possibilities of purchasing fishing vessel that are suitable for tuna catch operations in the Tanzanian marine waters. Then we, according to our estimation, we highly recommend to the private investors or to the public investor to invest in the lone liners, which could operate and harvest tuna in the EEZ, so that the lone liner vessels shows the high profitability rates and relatively lower investment payback period compared to the purse-seiners, which have a high operational cost. As a part of their foreign direct investment and public investment should be channeled into improving the fishing harbor and build processing facilities. And it should be noted that currently Tanzanian government is the Tanzanian government is working on this issue, and we hope that maybe in a couple of years, maybe end of the next year, the fishing harbor will be already constructed, and that the fishing harbor and other processing facility could reduce the transport cost by fishing vessel to other SVO countries for processing facilities, and increase also it could increase the government revenue by attracting more vessels, because currently the Tanzania export just only fresh and according to our estimation, based on other empirical evidence, deep water foreign nations have the surplus of high-skilled workers and fishing equipment. And also based on the climate change, based on other factors that could impact on the marine fishery sector, we could recommend to the Tanzania establish cooperative agreement under the fishing capacity transfer with the European Union nation and Asian countries. And we saw previously, I showed you that the European nation and Asian countries have approximately 500 vessels, industrial vessels, which are operated in the SVO region. And so that if the capacity transfer agreement between Asian countries and European Union could be agreed, so that Tanzania could access 70 tuna vessels with with corresponding capacity, which is more than 32,000 gross tonnage, and it could be distributed, divide these vessels between 45 perceiners and 20 long liners, and all of this increase the production capacity of the Tanzanian EEZ of the tuna fishery sector. For example, currently the production is 9 metric tons, but according to our estimation, we are predicting that it could be more than 30,000 metric tons annually. So this is a preliminary results, and thank you very much. I would be happy to hear your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, any questions? Okay, Professor Hillberry, please. You are muted. You are muted, Professor.
Very interesting presentation, but I had a few sort of questions about the institutions. I gather that foreign ships can fish in Tanzanian waters. Is that correct?
Yeah, previously, yes.
Yeah. And I think an important question around this topic would be, are they paying the right price for those rights? And would changes in those prices accomplish something along the lines of what you're interested in, right? So because investment is costly, but getting those prices right would be relatively much easier to do in a kind of administrative sense. So I don't know if the prices are too high or too low. It just seems like that would be a key thing to think about, or what are the licensing fees, and could they be changed? As a simpler way of addressing the issues that you're discussing. And then I also thought, just in terms of presentation, so the GDP impacts are not especially large. I think that makes sense because the it's just one part of the Tanzanian economy, and you're increasing a little bit of the fish taken. I think it would be useful in presentation just to say, okay, these are the modeled increase in fish take, and this is the price of fish, and so this is how much we'd add to the economy if we increased our fish take, as a sort of back of the envelope. So do that outside the model, and then we can kind of understand about how big this is and then do the model analysis, but kind of help us understand from the beginning, just how big is this in the context of the Tanzanian economy. So those are my comments.
Thank you. I think that, should I answer or not? Just only about the foreign fishing vessels, that the point of the foreign fishing vessels that we are paying just only fees, but all harvested catch is going to abroad of the Tanzania, and Tanzania does not take into account this fish. And so that the currently government try to open, because previously it was some close consideration with other nations, but now Tanzania is open to communicate with national fleets under the transfer, under the some fish agreement. For example, don't need to buy the newly established fishing vessel. Is it possible to use the European Union or Asian countries vessel? It's possible to use the capacity of these countries and then to share their catch between each other, something like that. And we're working on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. So any more questions? Yeah, so I have just a comment, or so, and also it's in line with the Professor Hillberry. So it's possible to, how can you track the property rights in this to catch these fish? So how can you model this? Because of course I'm not specialist on the topic. So, but I'm thinking about this because the fish, they are like we have this rival. It's a rival good, but also you have this property right to catch these fishes. So how can you model this, or can you control this in the model? It's possible.
I don't know exactly how it is possible to estimate the property rights, so that you know that Tanzania has own waters, marine waters, and all fish belongs to Tanzania, and so that all fish which have been catched, it is estimated in the Tanzanian account. The fish which is catched by the foreign fishing vessels, it does not take into account on international account. So that this catch is going out. So that we have used the catch that data, which and then we link this data with the marine fishery sector, with the domestic production, and then we disaggregated it, just only like this, if I understand you well.
Okay, thank you. We have 1 more minute for Q&A, so more questions? Or we can move on to the next presentation. Okay. So the next presentation, Professor Hillberry from Purdue University will present a paper. The title is Renewable Resource Rents, Taxation, and the Effects of Wind Power on Rural Economies. So the floor is yours, Professor Hillberry. Thank you.
Okay. Just figuring out this pointer here. Yes. Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. This is joint work with a graduate student at Purdue, Claire Nguyen. And I guess just to start with the motivation, and I just to save time, I won't read the whole quote, but in the 1970s, there was an issue of developing countries had resources, and they needed foreign capital to come in to sort of get those resources. And the economists that studied that kind of concluded that there isn't much way in a really capital intensive industry that uses local resources, there's not much spillover to the local economy. And that if you want to help the local economy, the main point is that you have to figure out a good way to do taxation. So what we've had in this part of America is this kind of sort of boom in renewable electricity generation. And, they haven't taken much tax money. And so we have another quote down here saying that, the developers say, well, we've never had a project stopped because, the taxes were too high, essentially. And so, that kind of is the idea of the paper, is that there's sort of efficient taxation that can be done in the renewable sector. And because of political constraints, this would actually possibly improve or increase the amount of renewable energy that is produced. And so just as a motivation, we've had this very large boom in domestic electricity generation, renewable energy. This is wind energy generation from 5.6 million megawatt hours in 2000 to 337.5 million in 2020. So it's just an enormous boom. And renewable energy is critical for our national and international climate change goals. But the capital intensity, it's very similar to this situation in the 70s with natural resources. There's a lot of capital intensity in this sector. And that means that the spillovers to the local economies are rather small. And so in the United States, the local governments have a lot of control over what goes on inside their boundaries. And so many local governments in the US have restricted capacity. So within this US state of Indiana, where Purdue University is at, about $5 billion of investment has been foregone. In other words, projects that would have been built except for these sort of political constraints at the local level. So the research question is, are there policies that can magnify the local economic benefits of hosting wind energy generation, thus making sort of acceptance of the local communities more likely? So the summary of the paper is going to be that we argue there's quantitatively significant resource rents, and these can be efficiently taxed. There are going to be two sources of resource rents in the paper. One is that there's an unpaid factor of production here. That's the wind itself. And so somebody's getting paid for the work of the wind, but they, in some sense, they don't deserve it because the wind is doing the work. And so that's a source of rent. And then in the US, there have been very generous federal subsidies to encourage renewable energy generation, and those are actually another source of rent, that are essentially being captured largely by the developers, not by the local communities. And so what we do in the paper is develop a partial equilibrium model with resource rents. We embed that model within an open economy general equilibrium model, and we use a Dutch disease framework for our general equilibrium. We calibrate the model to data on the two counties in Indiana that are the largest adopters, that have allowed the most wind energy. And they were also the first adopters of wind energy. And then what we do is we kind of calculate these rents, we tax the rents, and we distribute them locally. We distribute them just to a representative agent that represents the people in these economies. And then we kind of separate factor ownership. So we have different households within the county, and we look at distributional consequences. Okay, there's a literature I'll just discuss. There's sort of four literatures. One is kind of how much does wind affect local economies? The second is sort of how should you handle resource taxes, resource rents? What's the efficient way of doing taxation? The third is this older literature on the Dutch disease. That's the sort of envelope for our rent discussion. And then finally, the kind of tools for modeling general equilibrium issues. This is kind of the tradition of the Matheson and Rutherford sort of GAMS type tradition and GE models. Okay, what we have here is the state of Indiana. Purdue is right here in Lafayette. Just up the road are these two counties, Benton and White County. Those are the counties that I'll be discussing. But the point of this figure is that all these counties in yellow are counties that are probably wind energy generation is viable there. What's happened in most of those counties is that the wind energy developers have showed up and maybe even put together a proposal for building a wind farm, and the county governments have changed their rules or developed rules that have restricted the investment in wind energy generation in all of those counties. So you can see that there's an awful lot of counties where wind is probably viable, but it's not possible because of local objections. And that's the nature of the issue that we're discussing today. So I'm going to talk about two counties here in Indiana. I'm going to talk about Benton County and White County. I'll mostly talk about Benton County because it's smaller and it has more turbines. So the impacts of what I'm talking about are larger. And there's various statistics here, but I just want to draw your highlight a few of them. So both of these counties are very large producers of corn and of soybeans. I have here kind of their percentile in the US. You can see that they're both in the top 5% of corn producers and in the top 10% of soybean producers in the United States. So they're very, agriculture is very important in these rural counties, and this is what they produce. But if you look at the scale of the output of their primary agricultural outputs, and you compare that against the value of the electricity that is produced by the turbines that are in those locations, you can see that the gross output of the electricity sector is as large, or roughly as large, as the agricultural sector. But the key point is going to be that the value added produced locally, or at least the domestic revenue that is earned from the sector, is much lower than it would be in agriculture. And that's sort of the nature of the problem. So they're getting very little about having this electricity generation located in their counties. So the partial equilibrium model is a model, a GAMS type model with variational inequalities. So there's two main equations. One is that the output of electricity is going to be constrained by V, which is the capacity, how much the government allows there to be of turbines. A is a measure of how productive are those turbines in this location, how good is the wind, essentially. And H is just the number of hours that that are operated in a year. And so that's going to be the constraint. And the developers, I've taken out the kind of dynamics of this problem, and I'll discuss a little more why I think that's reasonable. But if you take away the dynamics and you just think about maximizing a profit function subject to the constraints, this E is going to be your choice of electricity. How much electricity do I produce? That's largely going to be determined by the constraint. But the point is, if I have a price of electricity that's fixed, I'll talk more about that in a minute, a subsidy from the government, and a kind of cost of producing this electricity. And I choose E, and this PV is my Lagrange multiplier. This is what I'm thinking of as the price of wind, the factor price of wind. And so that's the constraint on, that's the Lagrange multiplier on this problem. So I can write this problem as a variational inequality, which is useful for kind of embedding the model into the general equilibrium later. So, so this is two Kuhn-Tucker conditions that generate a choice of E and a choice and a value of the wind. And so the rents are going to be income that are just going to be this price of wind times the units of electricity that are produced. And that's going to be the kind of revenue that's available for efficient taxation. Okay, there's an issue of how big are the rents. And, so I guess there's kind of, the one point is that on the cost side, we all kind of can know from public documents about what the costs are of generating wind generated electricity, because the engineers have done the main calculation. So and because these are all known up front, it's possible to translate these into kind of per megawatt hour costs. And so these costs are known at the beginning. And then another thing that is known at the beginning, because of an unusual feature of this industry, is that the price is known. The price of electricity is known at the beginning, because the way these projects are built is by signing long-term contracts for the electricity, and that the long-term contract helps the developer attract more finance for building these very capital-intensive products. So they're almost always, the price is determined up front. What is the electricity price going to be? And there's a buyer, for example, Amazon. Amazon has bought electricity and long-term from these projects in order to run their data centers, for example. And so there's a buyer that buys at a fixed price, and then there's also a subsidy that's known. So just to save time, I won't go through all of this, but basically what we've done is kind of calibrate our cost function and figure out what the rents are with all of the information that we've had there. And I guess the key point is that we generate, first of all, it's very capital intensive industry. The contribution of labor to this sort of price, the revenue is here, 63.86. The capital cost has been reduced by $15. Labor, contribution of labor, which is just maintenance, largely is about just less than $2 out of the 63. And the payments to the landowners is about $1.2 out of the 63. So the local payments are very, very small. And if we kind of calculate the rents, we calculate a total of $9.72 per megawatt hour in rents that from these generation of turbines. And just for context, there's a federal subsidy of $15.86. So that rent could be kind of taken out of the federal subsidy, or you could kind of think about that as a possibility, right? Okay, the general equilibrium model, I won't spend a lot of time on kind of developing. It's just a Dutch disease model where the wind sector is the booming sector. There's three other sectors in the model. There's agriculture, manufacturing, and retail. Agriculture and manufacturing are exportable industries. Retail is domestic, serves only the domestic market. These are like the local gas station and the restaurants, etc. We amend the model to allow there to be purchases from the domestic consumers from outside the county economy. They can buy goods on Amazon or go to a neighboring town, that sort of thing. And that ends up being quite important in what we do, is that we allow these agents to buy services from outside the economy. Okay, so there's a income equation that is here. This is the balance of payments condition. A lot of the operation of the model is just operating through these two equations. If we impose a tax, we're going to affect sort of the rents that landowners get, for example, but we'll get more tax revenue. If we impose a tax, we'll kind of take some of the extra money that capital is getting because of these rents, and we'll use it largely to buy outside retail goods. Okay, so this is the first set of results. I've got results for both counties, but I'll focus on Benton County. That's the county with more turbines and less people. And so I do two counterfactuals. One is the wind sector arrives, and another counterfactual is the wind sector arrives and we apply an exhaustive resource rent tax. In other words, we take all the money that we can take without dissuading the investment, right? And so those are the two scenarios. I guess one of the punchlines is that if we just allow the wind sector to show up and apply the property taxes and other taxes that are applied normally, then in the model, the county receives $3.6 million from the wind sector's arrival. That's per year. But if we do the rent taxes, they get $27 million. So there's a much bigger revenue take under the taxation, increased taxation. You can see in the model the kind of Dutch disease operating. So the domestic retail price rises because there's this additional income that is used to purchase domestic retail services. The resale sector has to grow, and that sort of comes at the cost of the other sectors in the economy. You can see, because retail is labor intensive, the factor price of labor rises. And these effects are just magnified when there is a wind sector tax, right? The domestic retail price goes up more, the factor price of labor goes up more. But I guess a key point is that the imports of outside retail also rise. You have this additional income, so where do you spend it? You spend a lot of it outside these small, tiny counties. You buy more on Amazon, or you go to the local nearby town for restaurant meals or something like that. So that imports of retail services is quite large. And then we have welfare impacts that are rather large, at least for a trade economist to think about. Just having the wind sector shows up raises real income by 1.1%, and taxing it efficiently raises real income by 9.1%. Okay, we also do as I said, we have a kind of representative agent version of the model. That was the last slide. In this version, another version we have is each of the factor owners has their own kind of household. They all have the same consumption patterns, but they have different kind of resource rents, and they have different factor price responses to different changes. And one main reason to do this is that we can't have these turbines without the consent of the landowners. And so if the landowners are made worse off by the tax, then the investment is not incentive compatible. So what we've done is we've chosen the largest tax that's consistent with the utility of landowners being fixed at its benchmark level. And then we're also considering two possibilities. Mainly, what is the elasticity of substitution between domestic and outside retail? That ends up being pretty important for understanding the size of the Dutch disease. And these effects are largely similar. The point is that the Dutch disease effects are quite stronger in a Cobb-Douglas specification of that expenditure function than in a CES specification. And that sort of stronger Dutch disease effects makes it less possible to raise the tax. And so in a Cobb-Douglas specification, the efficient tax is only 35% of the exhaustion of the rents. And in the CES specification, it's about 63%. And that affects kind of the tax take. And then that affects sort of the utility, which is twice as high if we have CES than if we have Cobb-Douglas. So we did a number of other scenarios, which I don't have time to discuss, but one of these scenarios is to consider a Pareto efficient outcome. So let's make sure that nobody in the local economy loses from taxation. And what that means is, in our benchmark scenario, we're giving all the extra money to labor, just because they might offer the most votes for increasing the amount of wind energy. But if we want to make sure that no one is harmed, some of that money that did go to labor has to go to the other factor owners. And that means that labor ends up sort of at 14.5% better off rather than 16% better off in this scenario. We also did a scenario where we allowed the sector to hire labor from outside the economy. That might happen because you need a little bit of skilled labor. It's a particular set of skills. And if we do that, we get less factor price change. That supports higher levels of taxation. And so we end up about where we were before when we allow this kind of migration of labor to occur. Finally, we wanted to kind of think about, okay, we're studying all the turbines that showed up between 2007 and 2010. What about modern modern turbines in the modern setting? In other words, right now. We've had a lot of technological change in the sector that would have increased the resource rents, but we've had falling electricity prices and falling subsidies. Both of those things would have reduced the resource rents. And so we don't think there are very large rents for projects that are being created right now. Excuse me, but the environment is changing. The Biden administration has put the subsidies back on the table. With natural gas prices, the electricity prices are rising again. And so these rents are sort of more likely to appear. And so I think the contribution of our paper is to say that there are circumstances where these rents can be quite large, and we probably want a kind of framework for taxation, acknowledging that the rents might go up and down over time. United States, we have something called public utility commissions. They were used for rate setting when they were monopolistic providers of electricity. And, I think they have the analytical capacity to kind of do this if they were tasked with it. And that's kind of the point, that this is a feasible tax. Just to conclude, we've had a rapid rise in renewable electricity generation, mostly in rural areas. The federal government has supported this and has argued that we're doing this to help local development in rural areas. But because this is a capital intensive industry, the rural areas aren't benefiting very much from it. And so that we kind of argue that the way to kind of address this is sort of to have local taxation of these rents that were financed by the federal government, essentially. And if we did exhaustive taxation, we can find exactly the right tax rate in our model, then the benefits are quite large. But of course, our sensitivity results kind of show us that it's very difficult to kind of know the exactly right tax. So the right tax in that case is probably lower than the exhaustive level. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hillberry. Very nice presentation. Interesting topic. So, any questions for Professor Hillberry? So we have a question here from Anton. Anton, do you like to do the question, or I can read here?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Anton,
yeah, I see the question.
You are muted.
Oh, did I mute myself? Sorry.
No.
Oh,
Just
Anton.
okay. Yeah. Can you?
I think I get the question. Or if you want to ask me, Anton, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was asking because the column next to it, the next to 35%, the one with 63% tax, looks like in past the CS specification, but on the left-hand side, your column 2 with 35% looks like the sigma is estimated from your specification.
It's not estimated; it's imposed very close to 1. So we have a CES framework, but we want to approximate Cobb-Douglas, so we've set sigma to 1.0001 or something like this, right?
So trying to get away from the running off arrows or something.
Yeah. So we've just had essentially, I think of this as the Cobb-Douglas specification. This is the CES specification, but we've just kind of done that by putting a very low sigma. And so what that means is when sigma is lower, then the additional income that the people earn from the wind sector's arrival gets channeled more into domestic consumption. They can't substitute foreign consumption when the domestic price rises, right? So they end up spending a lot more on domestic retail. You can see that the price of retail goes up more in Cobb-Douglas, or sorry, that's labor. The price of retail goes up more in Cobb-Douglas than it does in CES. So that means the Dutch disease effect is stronger. And so that means that, because we have to keep landowners whole, we can't make landowners worse off, then because the Dutch disease effects are stronger, we have to have a lower tax. Because the tax is taking some of the rents of the landowners, right? So because we have a lower tax under Cobb-Douglas, we end up with lower tax revenue. And that means that we end up with slightly lower, we end up with a 4% gain rather than a 6% gain.
Did you also try fixing sigma exactly to 1? So I guess you can't really call that Cobb-Douglas if that's not.
I mean, it's operationally the same as Cobb-Douglas, right? It's an approximation for programming purposes. I mean, I think we did do a Cobb-Douglas specification, but for writing the equations of the model, it's better just to approximate it numerically. So,
got it. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? So I have one question. So it's interesting. So how the technologies, of course, is capital intensive. So have you tracked, Professor Hillberry, the leakage of this revenue for the rural areas? How much the revenue is staying in the county, and how much is we have this leakage for the other parts?
Yeah, so the way we addressed that issue was really to think about, I mean, we have the model. Well, let me answer it in 2 ways, right? So one issue is, okay, the industry pays people locally. Some people do maintenance. They pay the landowners for the right to use the land. They even pay some taxes, right? So those are kind of the payments from the industry to the local people. But then there's also these kind of benefit. Well, people have more income, then they can spend more on the local retail. So the model is capturing that kind of circulation of the spending, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess the point is in this exercise, we're kind of saying, look, out of $63.86 of revenue per megawatt hour, $1.84 is going to labor, $1.20 is going to land. There's some tax revenue there that we have in the model as well, but that's just not very much, because essentially they just put up the turbine and the turbine spins, you know, and there just isn't much for interaction with the local economy at all, right? And so the point is, though, that you know, the federal government subsidized that, and the wind, you know, the wind belongs as much to the people as to the capital, foreign capital, right? So who should be getting the benefits of that? Probably there should be bigger spillovers, and the way to get those is some kind of rent taxation. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you. More questions, guys?
Oh, one more. So Ras, you have in the counterfactual and the MCP, you have 3 equations, right? So one, the other one, so 1 equality one, and 2 inequality equations.
Yeah, I think almost everything is going to bind with equality. We want the inequality so that we know we're not shutting the sector down. So the model is built so if the tax is too high, the sector doesn't show up and then nobody gets anything, right? And so that's why it's important to have the variational inequality there, is that you allow the sector to kind of be shut down if you tax it too much.
Yeah, so is that the rents equation somehow isomorphic to the income balance condition in normal trades, that how the intuition comes from?
Well, I think the point is that all the factor prices change incidentally to the sort of changes in income and spending, you know. So the main action is sort of in the income equation. You know, there's this tax variable here where we put on the tax, we take some money from the landowners, and in the balance of payments, there's this tax variable here. If we take some money from the foreign developers, you know, or the outside developers, that happens here. And then, you know, the balance of payment condition is, you know, something has to match that reduction in payments. And a lot of that shows up here as purchases of outside retail.
I see. And the tax impacts the Lagrange multipliers, right? The price of the unit expenditure for wind.
Yeah, that you can think of that PV as the tax rate that would be efficient, right?
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Professor Farzad, please.
Thanks, Russell, for the nice presentation. Sorry, I missed the first part of your presentation. So the question that I have, so have you studied the choice of using the land for farming versus installing the wind turbines?
Yeah, so they take very little land, and they can operate basically with agriculture. And so this doesn't displace very much agriculture, but we're assuming that the agents in the model know how best to do that. You know, I mean, okay, the county makes a decision about how many turbines, but then other than that, the landowners are choosing between agriculture and turbines, right?
Yeah, so basically, I have a project going on, and in that project, we are trying to understand the land use implications of installing wind turbines at a larger scale. So my interest is in the way that we can incorporate the choice between using the land for farming. I understand the area is small for each wind turbine, but when it goes at a larger scale, probably it takes a bigger portion. So my concern or my question is that can we use this modeling framework to
so I think so. I mean,
between the two?
Yeah. So in this model, we've just, you know, the local government officials tell us, well, when we think about this issue, we think about 1 acre per turbine. that, this is 1 acre of land that is required per turbine. And we have modeled it as if that is the demand, each turbine demands 1 acre of land. Now, I think what's interesting in this context is really how different solar and wind are. Solar takes up quite a large part of the land, basically displaces agriculture altogether, whereas wind just sort of operates above the agriculture. And so there's a lot less land displacement with wind energy than with solar. But solar is not as politically controversial because there's not these giant turbines in the air, right? So I think we could use this framework to think about solar, where those issues are much more important, I think, at least in magnitude. But maybe the political controversy is less with solar than with wind. And so the kind of motivating issues are maybe not as large either. So.
Okay, great, thank you.
So we have one more question here on chat made by Charles. Thank you, Professor. Nice presentation. I have a question. Would the federal subsidies be offset by local tax?
Yeah, so in the current version of the model, the federal government is providing $15 per megawatt hour, and we're proposing that the local government take 9, So it's I guess another way of doing it is that the federal government could pay the counties to accept wind, right? This is just a way, you could do the same thing if the federal government was subsidizing the counties instead of subsidizing the developers. So.
Okay. Yeah, so we have 2 minutes for questions or comments or. Okay, so I should close the session, but I would like to say thank you for all the presenters. I had like a very nice morning with these brilliant presentations. We had like 4 very good presentations and nice papers. So I hope all of you enjoy, guys. And yeah, thank you, Uris, to be the host of our session. Thank you all. And enjoy the rest of the conference and enjoy your day.